Hello, welcome to Into the Fire, a Burning Coal Theater Company podcast series.
Hi, this is Jerome Davis. I'm the artistic director of Burning Coal Theater Company, and I'd like to welcome everyone to Into the Fire, the Burning Coal Theater Company podcast series on all things theatrical. Boy, do we have a person today to talk to. We're being joined right now by Frank Rich, who is one of the most prominent theater critics that our nation has ever seen, and possibly along with maybe Ken Tynan, one of the most influential theater critics in the Western civilization. So we feel really honored to have Frank Rich here with us today. Mr. Rich is originally from DC. He wants me to call him Frank, so I'll do that. He's originally from DC, where my wife grew up as well. Went to school had an Ivy League education at Harvard, I believe it was, Frank.
Yeah. Yes.
And then from about 1980 to the mid 90s was the lead drama critic at the New York Times, which is obviously a most influential position. Since then, Frank has been working on a number of projects. He's a essayist for New York Magazine, but has also served as executive producer for several high water mark cultural programs, television programs, Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but also Succession. Is that right? You were working on Succession as well. Fantastic. Well, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you,
Frank. I really appreciate it. So DC, your family was there, and what did your parents do? Were they involved in the theater in some way?
Not really. My father had a small retail family business, and my mother was a school teacher, but they're big theater goers. My stepfather, my mother's second husband, who sort of entered my life when I was an adolescent, did have some sort of vaguely shady, he was sort of a K Street lawyer type, had a vaguely shady relationship with what was then called the League of New York Theaters, now called the Broadway League, and I think did some lobbying for them on tax issues, and it allowed us to get house seats when we went to New York. So it was great.
Nice, very nice. And was theater your focus growing up? I know that drama criticism is in the ballpark of theater practice, but most people who are interested in theater want to act or want to direct, but writing about it is a step removed from that. I think, was that the focus from an early age, or did you want to be in the theater?
I was totally obsessed with the theater beginning probably at age 5, before I could, even really read and write. And uh I went to an arts camp in the Berkshires that my parents found for me. Washington then and now, not a great theater or culture town in my humble opinion, and now about to be less so since they've basically removed the Kennedy Center from action. But
Yeah.
but I it- but I was obsessed with, I was also obsessed with journalism, which may have been a factor of growing up in DC. And I grew up in the city. It was every it was the company town of politics, and so I always liked newspapers too, and somehow the two things melded by the time I was in college. Although I did act in one play in college, and during Match the Visit, actually a terrific play
Sure.
with no help from me. I didn't really enjoy it. We did like 3 or 4 performances. I got bored. I didn't think it was particularly good. And I just loved writing about I loved writing, and still do, obviously, and loved writing about the theater. I say a key thing in my development as a critic, but also even now, sort of being in the theater as a producer over the past 15 years in television. Um, Washington in those days, it was right before the Kennedy Center was built, and it had arena stage. It didn't have a lot else going on. Folger, this current Shakespeare Theater, didn't exist in its current form,
Mm-hmm.
but it had a tryout house, the National Theater, which is still standing near the White House, what would turn out to be the last era when Broadway shows would have tryouts out of town, generally in some combination of Washington, New Haven, Boston, and
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
Hartford.
So
Yeah.
I had this. I went there a lot as a kid. In fact, one of the first show I saw on my own dime without my parents as a 12-year-old was the original tryout of A Funny Thing Happened Away at the Forum
Hmm.
Sondheim show.
Hmm.
Um, but then it was this period of just a golden age of Broadway and shows coming in every 3 weeks. Manager took pity on me, hired me as a ticket taker so I could go for free. And so watching successful shows, unsuccessful shows for free night after night during 2 or 3 week runs in Washington turned out to be training for me to write about the theater, training for me to real. I look at that back at that time now, and I'm on the set of a show like Succession, and there are lessons I apply, and so that was a formative thing for me. But I also was on the high school paper. I wrote political editorials. Indeed, I had a whole other career as a grown up as a political columnist, and I still
Right.
occasionally get involved in. So that's that sort of explains I hope sort of explains what I ended up doing.
Sure. Sure. At Harvard, if I understand the story correctly, you identified Sondheim very early on as someone that was likely to have a profound impact on the art form. Is that apocryphal, or is that a true
Well,
story?
what happened was this really. I was writing drama reviews and movie reviews for the Harvard Crimson, which was a daily student paper. In my junior year, company tried out again, still in the day of Broadway tryouts, tried out at the Schubert in Boston on its way into New York.
Right.
And the following season, Follies did.
Right.
Um, and as I was graduating, and indeed, in the case of Follies, it opened during a blizzard. Both these shows got mediocre reviews in Boston. And of Follies, particularly, and Follies never really was a critical success. It wasn't a critical success really in New York either. Um, Sondheim wrote me a typed letter that found its way to me in the office of the school paper. He'd seen my review somehow. Someone in the cast had a relative who somehow saw it, and he asked to meet me. And it was as a kid, basically wanting to be a writer. It was incredibly uh, uh, confidence building, and he felt I got the show, so I can't say I did anything to really help Follings, but certainly he did something to help me, and many years later, I wouldn't become a professional drama critic till a decade after that. I was a movie critic in New York and writing political pieces and other stuff. And then I was drama critic, and I couldn't know people that I reviewed. If I did know them, I couldn't review them. One of the first things I had to review was Merrily We Roll Along in its disastrous original Broadway production,
Yeah.
1981, and then after I finished being drama critic, we became good friends. Um, what would be the last 25 years of his life, where we talked about all the stuff and toured the country talking about it on stage and everything else.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of? I mean, I think this could apply to most of those early pieces, but uh, specifically about Merrily, about what it was about the piece that was not, I guess, ready to be received by the public at large.
Well, there's some confusion about it because the fact is that the Merrily you'll be doing, the one Merrily that was a hit on Broadway and revival last season, is a pretty revamped
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
And it famously had just a disastrous original production. First of all, there were many things that were changed in the text, even numbers will ultimately be switched out. Um, but the Hal Prince, who directed it originally, had this idea of putting high school kids in it.
Hmm.
And you know, the problem with it is the show is in reverse. That basic problem is the show's in reverse chronological order, beginning with three middle-aged characters and following them backwards in time to their innocence of high school graduation. In fact, the original piece opened at high school graduation. They jettisoned years later.
Yeah.
So you had 18-year-olds or 17-year-olds playing for the whole first act, jaded middle-aged showbiz types, and it was embarrassing. It was never ever done that way again. The very first attempt to redo it, like 4 or 5 years later, La Jolla, directed by James Lapine, they put in actors who were in their 40s, or late 30s. But also was badly designed. And I encourage people to, if they see your production, to go on YouTube. You can see some of videos of some, not crude ones, but there were, bootleg videos of technology at that time of the original Broadway production.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shocking. It doesn't really, it won't resemble anything without even having seen yours that you're doing.
Let's
Um,
hope.
and I think so. I don't think it was. I think it was just such an awful production. Um, it was a desperate production. They apparently during previews threw out the costumes at the last minute and just put people in sweatshirts with playwright, ex-wife, the
Mm.
characters descriptions on them.
Little
Um,
Brechtian touch.
yeah, Brechtian, but alas, without the charm. And so it got all bad reviews. It had no champions. I was a champion of the score. I thought the score was, and still do think it's fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
but what's fascinating about what Sondheim and George Firth, whom I didn't know, did, they kept working on it. I mean, it was a big moment in Sondheim's uh, trajectory because he had this very successful collaboration with Prince on Sweeney Todd Company, A Little Night Music, Pacific Overtures, and Forum, where Prince was the producer, and it broke up their relationship, a professional relationship, which led to him Sondheim going off Broadway and working with Lapine, and the first thing he would do next would be Sunday in the Park.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about Sondheim is that he kept he's very undoctrinaire about his work. He was willing to consider anything. He loved the film version of Sweeney Todd. He was game for anything.
Mm.
But he and Firth just kept working on it, and there gradually were revivals of nonprofit theaters, including one at Arena Stage in Washington,
Right.
like 10 years after the opening. But they didn't really get this text together to not that long before Steve died, and he did see a British version of the version that he froze in the end. This was after Firth now had died. He deceased Sondheim in London that Maria Friedman did that and set that text. And so it's just a better show. And I don't think it was and as far as the content bothering people at the time, I don't think people got that far. It was a very confusing production. And it's interesting. The play it's based on by Kaufman and Hart from the 30s um, got great reviews, and when it opened in 1934. So it's the same period they did, You Can't Take It With You and The Man Who Came to Dinner.
Right.
But also it did flop. It ran like 5 weeks. It's quite a bit different from what Sondheim and first did, but in some ways not. But the idea, most people, when they finish a show and it's a failure, they leave it alone. But he kept going back to it, and it's just a much stronger show. And you can see the differences in the score by listening to the quite good original cast album, because you don't have to see the production, but then listen to one of the later recordings, including of the most recent Broadway production, and you'll get a sense of what's some of the things that have changed.
I've often thought that the idea of having young people play kind of the weight of experience, I guess, is
Mhm.
is a difficult challenge for them. Older people can sometimes feign youth, the exuberance
Right.
of youth for short periods of time, but in the other direction. And also they're so unlikable in that last scene that we have to really work hard, I think, to get the audience back on their sides as the story moves backwards. So
Someone famously said of the Catherine Hart play, and it was some wag at the time. I can't remember who said in the 30s. Um, they're incredibly successful. They have these glamorous lives. They're married they married beautiful women. In the case of the two men, what's the problem?
what's the problem?
and
Yes,
and and and
exactly.
and and and, and, and when you have and you had the original Broadway production, teenagers with sort of fake gray hair pretending to have been through Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, like marital problems and everything else. It was ridiculous. And people couldn't even engage in it, but
Yeah.
it works. But it is uh, um, it's a tough piece, and while it was very commercially successful in this last revival, it will stand with some of Steve's other work as material that will never be it'll never be the Sound of Music, and but it's fantastic
Doesn't
stuff.
have to be.
Obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of brings up a question that I've always been curious about, and I think you would be a terrific person maybe to contemplate this question. Perhaps you already have. The play is set. If you look at it in chronological years, it's from like the 57 to 75, 76. Which runs the gamut between the beginning of the second Eisenhower term to the year that Jimmy Carter was elected, right? And
Hmm.
that's a pretty big. It's a short period of time, but it's a lot of change. A lot of cultural change, and the play doesn't seem to reference a lot of that, at least on the surface. It talks a great deal about what's happening in their industries, but is it there? Do you think, or was Sondheim not interested in that?
It's a great question. I would say a couple of things. First of all, there are, and they've kept changing it in different versions of the show over the past 4 decades. But there are these sort of newscasts in the script
Mhm.
that I feel don't really play, never played well, still don't play well. They're trying to remind you, like, I can't remember what, I don't know, the Vietnam War is ending, or
Yeah,
Roe v. Wade is, things like that. They've shaken this. I'm sure is Firth, not Steve. They've constantly changed them. I don't think it really works, and I feel that my least favorite number in the show, but many people don't agree with me from the get-go in every version of it, is when you see them as young people starting out and doing a kind of downtown nightclub satirical reviews, the three main
yeah, yeah.
characters,
The
when they're
the
fledgling.
Kennedy, yeah,
The Kennedy number, I feel, particularly now, but always, it seems like the Kennedy jokes seem stale.
yeah,
And very, very dated. And I think many audiences now won't even know what they mean. I mean, I grew up as a kid in Washington, so when it was going on, so I remember it. But
yeah,
um, and I know and I think, but even there, I think Steve's interest probably was not even saying anything about the Kennedys. It was about trying to capture a kind of review number that he and Mary Rogers and Hal Prince would have done early in their careers when they worked on the Mad Show together, for instance, and off Broadway in the '60s. And so I don't think their heart was really in it. And it's interesting that when I know about Steve, learned about Steve as a person, he definitely, cared about the news. He did, he didn't just read the culture section of the paper,
right.
um, and had strong uh, views about it. Um, but it wasn't a real passion of his. And I think that he could get fascinated by a very specific point in history particularly the shows with John Weidman, like Pacific Overtures and Assassins.
Yeah.
But he would be the first to say it's John Weidman who wrote the books of those shows that opened me up to that. Um, and so you're right. I don't think it really deals with the period so much. And frankly, I think the show it's universal enough that it's sort of you get the sense, it's pre-rock and roll, basically. It's which is Steve, he just missed the rock and roll era. Um,
Yeah.
as a writer, and I think that it doesn't really help to have these period references. You need them in some places, and you can't cut the Kennedy number. But
Mhm.
uh, it would have been a good conversation to have with him. I'm not sure it adds much, and it's really part of it. I give you
He?
one other example. Oh, sorry, just
Yeah.
one Pacific Overtures. One running discussion I had with him in his later life. Pacific Overtures was about Commodore Perry in the 19th century opening up Japan, right,
Right.
to the West. The
Yeah.
way it played in 1975, I wasn't a critic yet, but I saw it, of course. It felt to me about the Vietnam War. It felt basically the last number next is sort of this accusatory number. And when I would mention that to Stephen later, no, that wasn't in our mind at all. But it was written when the Vietnam War was failing and about to end. Um, it was about sort of American imperialism and Western colonialism in Asia, and in Asia. But he didn't see it that way, rightly or wrongly. So it's just not where his head was.
My wife likes to point out that Georgia O'Keeffe thought there was nothing sexual about her flowers paintings, you know. So,
Well, it's great. And by the way, one other thing I wanted to say about vis-a-vis Merrily, about Steve's own take on his own stuff. One of the first things I did working in TV was Lapine and I did a documentary called Six by Sondheim,
mhm,
and part of it was we restaged a few of numbers in our own sort of music video way from his career. One of which was Opening Doors, a number sung by the three characters when they're young, in the second act of Merrily.
yeah.
He persistently, to the day he died, said that is the only autobiographical thing he ever
Yeah.
wrote.
Well,
So Georges Seurat and George in the second act of Sunday in the Park,
yeah, not
nothing to
children
do
and
with
heart.
it.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I just took those characters. In the case of Gypsy, he Steve famously talked about his apparently quite horrible mother and how he was maltreated by her.
Yeah.
No Mama Rose, nothing to do with his mother. And so it's sort of hilarious. Whereas Opening Doors is literally him, Prince, and Mary Rogers knocking on doors to start their careers.
Yeah.
But he had his things and he was sticking to them about his own work.
I have something in common with you. I have a typed letter from Stephen Sondheim also.
Oh,
Uh,
that's wonderful. What
yeah,
what occasion did?
well, when we first started our theater back in the '90s, we didn't have a space at the time, and we were looking at this old department store that was about to be torn down. And I started thinking, how cool would it be to do Evening Primrose in
Great
this old
idea.
department store? And so we had a fairly long back and forth. And finally, he sent me the typed letter saying, I just don't want it to be done anywhere else. I feel like it was done for that medium, and it should stay there. So we
That
almost got it. We were close, but
that's a great idea, and it's interesting. I wish I had known about that. Yes, he never let that be done. In other things, he has let be done, like Saturday Night, a show that was never even produced.
right.
And it seems unlike him to. He was so liberal about letting his stuff be used in different ways, um,
Mhm.
that I bet he could have been talked into it, a decade or two later. The two
Yeah.
things I've heard of him, he's really allowed, he's allowed Forum to be done in drag. He's allowed all sorts of the two things I know that he shut down was one, production of Company. These were both, I think, collegiate productions. A production of Company, which ended with Bobby, after singing Being Alive, shooting himself. And And the other one was some college group tried to do Merrily reversing the chronology, doing it in
Yeah,
chronological order, and he stopped that. But
yeah,
otherwise, he was pretty loosey goosey about what he allowed.
it's interesting. I should think the director would have let the audience come to that conclusion on their own, about shooting themselves. Well, this has been a joyous event for me, and I appreciate your joining us, Frank. What are you? I'm just curious to close. What are you working on now? You're about to head off into production for something. Is it
Uh,
something you can talk about?
it's something I could talk about a very little bit. It will have been announced by the time people hear this, but actually it hasn't been announced yet, and some of it keeping it in wraps. But Jesse Armstrong, this British writer that wrote a little bit on Veep and created and wrote most of Succession,
Yeah.
um, came up with an idea suddenly for a film, not a TV series that we're doing for HBO, and it is the hope is being done. It came together very fast and starts shooting a week from today in Utah, of all places, and it is a, a kind of a chamber piece. It's about four guys who are billionaires and are friends meeting for fun and games at one of their homes over a weekend, as on a weekend where the world happens to be spinning into a international crisis.
Mhm.
And it's a very dark comedy. If people saw Succession or V for that matter, that's it's something of the tone. And Jesse, who's never directed before, is directing for the first time. And I could actually say some of the cast, even though 'cause I think it's being actually announced tomorrow. You'll cut that out as big, so
Yeah, we won't
just
release
keep
this
it,
tomorrow.
keep this what I'm saying this second to yourself
Sure.
until you cut. Um, but it's with Steve Carell and Jason Schwartzman and wonderful young comic actor Rami Youssef, and a less known actor who is quite brilliant, I think, named Corey Michael Smith, who's been in a couple of Todd Haynes movies, including May December most recently, and was also weirdly but very funny playing Chevy Chase in the movie about Saturday Night
Saturday
Live's
night.
first
Yeah.
night. Yeah.
Yeah, he was
And
good.
yeah, he's very good. And so I'm excited. We'll see. The hope is to get it up. We'll see this spring.
And
It's like a guerrilla operation, very fast.
and it's a multi-part series or a
No,
single.
no, it's a feature length. It's being done as a
uh,
film by HBO. Yeah, so it'll be like 100-minute film or whatever.
Thank you. Well, Frank, that's wonderful to have you here with us today, and just thank you for everything you've done for our industry. It's
Well,
been I know you had a not altogether flattering nickname when you were the critic at the
the
Times, but
butcher of Broadway, yes,
yeah,
um,
but
created for me in London, actually.
oh,
But thank you. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you. I wish I could see the show. Are you in rehearsal yet?
no, we go into rehearsal on the 12th, which is next week. So we're gearing up and going to take a crack at it. If you're ever in North Carolina and in the Raleigh area or Triangle area, come on over and see us. We'd love to meet you sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to, and Vince could bring me there. So who knows? How long has the company existed?
My wife and I moved from New York to Raleigh in 1996. We did our first production in 1997, which was a play called, wait for it, Rat in the Skull. Uh,
Oh, I know
uh,
that play.
the
I
play.
reviewed that play as a drama critic, and of course,
Yeah.
Brian Cox, who I worked with on Succession, was in the original production of it in New
Gary
York.
Oldman. Yeah, Gary Oldman too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was it's one of the great. I think it's one of the great plays written in the last 30 years or so. But nobody ever does it for some reason.
In fact, I had the same conversation with Brian Cox repeatedly on set. He remembered it fondly. Of course, he's been in everything, done everything. He thought it was one of the best plays he ever did, and
Yeah,
also just baffled why it sort of faded into memory. The play.
Yeah, who knows? Speaking of Sondheim, real quick, I am going to be seeing Here We Are, Here We Go. Is that the new
Here we
Sondheim
are.
in
Yes.
April? They're doing it at the National Theater. They're opening the Joe Mantello production of it at the
Yes.
National.
Yes. It's something I wrote a piece about it for New York Magazine. I reconstructed how it was done. Um, and it's very much worth seeing. The production is fantastic. And I think this is a duplicate with some cast changes, but depending on who's available, but it won't matter. And yeah, that's yeah, I'd like to see it over there too. They're doing it probably at the Littleton, right? Is my guess.
I
It's sort of.
noticed, yeah, it might be the Dorfman. It's I can't remember. It was very hard to get a ticket. I know that.
Oh, I'm sorry for you, but I'm glad to hear it's hard to get a ticket. Uh, but that's yeah. Well, I'll be curious. Yeah, let me know what you think of it. It is what it is. It's not really a complete show. I do think it's a finished show.
Yeah,
Um, and you know, it's just great that
they're picking.
David Ives and Mantello were able to,
Yeah.
and Jonathan Tunick finish it off.
Well,
Um, what a couple other things. I know you want to say an official goodbye, but if you want to, we can. But first, I'm very curious where your mo- what where your wife grew up in Washington, where she went to high school, and what was she doing there?
Yeah, my wife she grew up in Kensington, which is
Hmm.
right near Bethesda, and she
Right,
went to the only high school in America named after a baseball player,
Walter Johnson.
Walter Johnson High School. Yeah, yeah, and she wanted to be in theater. She wanted to be a set designer. She's a little bit older than me. Uh, Not too much older, but she went to Northwestern, for undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't really want her there. They made it very clear. This was back in the 70s. As she says, back before the earth cooled, they told her as much. They basically said a woman can't drive a nail as well as a man. How could you possibly make an A in my class? That kind of
It's
thing.
horrible.
And sort of let her, she let them run her out. And so she went to American University, where her mother worked on the staff. She was an assistant to one of the deans, and so she got free tuition. And they had a very good art program there, painting, and so she learned
Hmm.
computer science, but also painting, and you know. And probably never would have gotten back into theater had she and I not met down on 25th and 2nd on New Year's Day of 1992, I think it was.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, yeah, it was a strange little confluence of events, but she's a good one, and she's helped the company out a lot over the years, and loved DC. She wanted me to mention to you Davy Marlon Jones and the
Davy
Washington.
Martellin Jones. I didn't know him, but of course I knew him. He was a director of the Washington Theater Club,
Right.
where I went to a little briefly to a little like for seventh grade kind of theater school there, and he was on mainly after I moved out of Washington as an adult, but an on-air television theater critic, and I guess movie
Right.
critic on TV. It's interesting about this. Set design was a thing that utterly fascinated me. The first book I wrote was about Boris Aronson, a great that did all the
Yeah.
did comp, did not do Merrily, but did do Company and Night Music and Pacific
Yeah.
Overtures. Um, and uh,
Mid-century. Yeah.
and yeah, mid-century, but also dating back to the group theater and the avant-garde Yiddish theater, and came up
Yeah.
with Chagall and Russia. Um, and my father had a family shoe business no longer exists called Rich's Shoes,
Mhm.
and I would get the shoe boxes and build models of sets.
Sure.
That
Yeah.
really interested. I know particular, but I think that's shocking about Northwestern really because
Yeah.
it's been a force for good in terms of particularly in recent
It's
decades
amazing.
pushing
Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
yeah.
It was just
Uh,
a brief window of time when people were not yet thinking in an egalitarian manner, I think. And it also could have been one or two people. So I probably shouldn't spread that
Yeah,
story so far and
yeah,
wide as I do. But
yeah. I know. By the way, I met my wife in 1991 at 50th and Second.
oh, no
So
kidding! Wow.
yeah, it's an odd circumstance.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, uh, One thing I wanted to recommend to you that you might enjoy reading if you're not aware of it. Well, two things. First of all, the best critique of Merrily really is Steve's own, which I'm sure you have read, and his chapter on it in the collected
In
lyrics.
the
I mean,
big. Yeah.
he explains pretty accurately what went wrong and how they set out to fix it. There's a writer who grew up to be a journalist, not about culture, named Robin Pogrebin, spelled Pogre Bin. Um, uh, and her sister, I don't know her. Her sister Robin Pogrebin is to this day an arts writer, news reporter at the Times. But Abigail Pogrebin, she was in the high school class with Hal Prince's daughter that Merrily was largely cast from. And she wrote this piece that must come out at least 10 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. It's called Showstopper. And the only place you can find it is on Amazon. It was when they were doing something called Amazon Singles and publishing essentially long magazine pieces as quote digital books. But you
Right.
can get it for like $3, so it's a Kindle book or you can get it in some form.
Right.
It's this incredibly touching memoir, looking back as almost follies like a middle-aged woman with children of her own being in this show on Broadway and the whole failure of it. And it's Sondheim and Prince were heroes to her. Friends of hers from school were in it.
Yeah.
And they're 18-year-olds and sort of get what's going on, but not. There's almost like a what Maisie knew quality to it. It's very, very moving. It's like 8,000 words. And it's really the best thing I've read about what that original production was like from the inside. So I think you'll get a kick out.
I will do. Yeah.
And
And
some of it
you're,
was ripped off from the Lonnie Price documentary, but this
yeah.
is better. Yeah, go on. Oh, sorry.
He just agreed to do our podcast too, by the way.
Oh, good, good. One problem with his film is fine. I'm in it, but
Yes.
uh, it 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 doesn't take it. It acts as if the show was received poorly because it was too daring, but I can't remember the extent acknowledges how bad the production is, but it makes no acknowledgement of the fact that Stephen and George Firth rewrote it.
Yeah.
And so when there's like a reunion concert, it's already a different version of it. But he was really good in it as a performer. God knows, he was great in it. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice
Well,
guy too.
I've heard. Yeah, I understand. I enjoyed the film just as a as a reflection of ways different people recall the same thing in different ways, which
Yes,
that
yes.
was fun. Frank, again, this will be my like third or fourth effort to end this conversation, and frankly, I could go on all day, but I know you have other things to deal with, and so thank you very much for joining us here on the Burning Coal Theater Company podcast, and I wish you the best on the new project. In Utah. You're
Yeah, in
going to Utah.
Utah.
Yes. Enjoy
Uh,
it. I hope
uh,
it's not too cold.
yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine. But listen, very nice to meet you. I hope our paths will cross in person. Find me in New York as well if you're up for it. And I'd love,
Yeah.
love to meet you in real life.
Thank you.
Break a
You have an
leg.
open-
Break a leg.
Yeah, we'll need it. We'll need that very much.
I doubt it.
Thank you, sir. And we look forward to seeing you down the road somewhere.
I hope so. Thank you very much. Take care.
Cheerio.